It doesn't take much to see that Deus Ex Mankind Divided is a real labour of love. Not only visually arresting, this is a game with substance. It's rich, dense and thought-provoking in a number of ways. Yes, it fell victim to corporate meddling. Yes, there was that awful Augment Your Pre-Order campaign. And yes, Adam Jensen, cybernetic Mega Man, still doesn't possess the raw strength to carry an average-sized human. I mean, come on dude, I can do that and I have all the upper body strength of a dead snake. Mankind Divided was always meant to be a bigger game, and sadly it's looking less and less likely that we'll get to see that final vision. But it is testament to the talents of its developer that what we did get feels largely complete, or at least a good setup for a final chapter in Adam Jensen's story. But there is one thing I haven't touched on yet, something I think is inarguably Mankind Divided's biggest fault. There is a wide dissonance between its overarching themes and the strength and autonomy of the audience's cipher, which leads to a lot of extremely relevant and important conversations in the game feeling disingenuous. This is a problem of privilege, why good intentions aren't enough, and why sometimes you really can't have your cake and eat it. Let's talk about this. Prague is hurting. In the wake of the events that took place 2 years prior, the city has become a giant epitaph, a painful homage to the violence that occurred, but also a reminder of how quickly hurt can turn into hate. And this living, breathing socio-political diorama is the setting for a game all about hate. Mankind is indeed divided, as augmented persons fall victim to paranoia and blind, aimless retribution, segregated, observed, feared. This thematic aspect of Mankind Divided really shines through in the heavy architectural juxtaposition of the city. The Prague of Deus Ex is not some impossibly vast, glistening metropolis. It's a small, intimate, personal space. It's beautiful and ugly in equal measure. Gorgeous murals and lavish brickwork, cut jarringly with barricades, checkpoints, and the omnipresence of state-sanctioned violence. The pristine tower of the Palisade Bank, and the lush, deep crimson glow of the red light district. This is a city of composition and distinction, of economic extremes that tell a sadly still very relevant story through brick and mortar, steel and neon. And then all this is flipped on its head in Golem City. An industrial ghetto, a dark, oppressive place, all shipping containers and drones, countless lives ripped from homes and loved ones and stacked on top of one another, as though they were not living, breathing, thinking, feeling beings, but inventory, an augmented life treated like an illegal good. Golem City is an awful place, where Prague is light and open, an air of optimism and a bright skybox concealing the sinister true nature of the city. The metal slums are somewhat the opposite, overt in its message, crushingly oppressive in its design. But within that dark place there lies a glimmer of hope. Humanity hasn't been extinguished yet. It smoulders quietly still. For every ugly metal rash scarring this ghetto, there's a small burst of colour that signals mankind's great resistance. People banding together to make what little they have work. And it's quite telling of the sort of tone that the developers wanted to affect, that the first thing you encounter upon arrival is a triage clinic. Contrast this with the brutal, often cutthroat coldness of Prague's denizens, and you see a message clear as day. In our darkest moments, at our most powerless, it is our common vulnerability that unites us. Deus Ex's grand arcing meta-narrative on transhumanism and history-defining global conspiracy is fine, but in my opinion it's something of a tedious pill to swallow alone. What makes it good is not what it is, but what it is used for, and that's the telling of strikingly human stories. Mankind Divided is full of these stories. There's a terrorist plot to foil, an internal investigation to dive into, criminal entrepreneurs to negotiate with, and dark shadowy figures to uncover, yet these are all just happenings. They act as structural waypoints that lead the player through a world full of tall tales that, at their core, strike a personal tone. An underground community brainwashed by an Oz-like leader. A frightened woman caught in the vices of an identity card racket, a vicious drug epidemic sweeping through the city. For me, however, the most chilling of these begins with a murder. Angela Gunn has met with a gruesome fate, an augmented person, fallen prey to some unknown vicious malignance. She is found in an alleyway next to your apartment block, with only one somewhat unreliable witness. During your investigation, you are tasked with interrogating the lead suspect, Angela's ex-husband, Johnny. Johnny is a bit of an asshole, but throughout your talk it becomes increasingly clear that not only is he not the culprit, but he may even be a victim of an altogether more insidious crime, the theft of his humanity. The Harvester and its sister side quest The Last Harvest touch on this theme that's prevalent in a lot of cyberpunk, the gulf between the theory and practice of human augmentation. What's heralded as a miracle for the disabled, a way to truly elevate mankind into something greater, for the most part is a matter of logistics and finance, invariably becoming a tool of wealth inequality and ultimately oppression. Johnny Gunn is an augmented person, not through choice but through necessity. As with Jensen, he had been grievously injured in the line of duty and summarily rebuilt by the hand that feeds, and he resents this transition. He grieves for the little things now lost to him, the soft comfort of a lover's embrace, the stinging pain of a blister, hot sand running between toes, cool water caressing tired hands. Johnny is not a machine, but his rehabilitation was treated like a maintenance issue. Limbs saved thanks not to technology, but to perceived economic value. That sound familiar? Because it should. This is the heart of Mankind Divided's narrative, what makes it so compelling. Human beings, vulnerable, exploited, but pulling back on the leash that binds them. Life existing far beyond the subsistence many of us are gripped by. The truth behind Angela's vicious murder is indeed horrifying, but it is the tragedy of Johnny Gunn's story that will always stick with me. Considering the way this video opened, you might be wondering why I've been focusing so much on the positive aspects of Mankind Divided. And the answer is simple. It's a great game. It's just blighted by a single encompassing issue that can be traced back to one man, Adam Jensen. We've talked about juxtaposition. We've talked about the beating heart of cyberpunk, about oppression and division and exploitation and all that harrowing shit that is every bit a part of modern life as it is this fictional future. But without a central actor to slot coherently into this narrative, it risks becoming window dressing, or worse. Especially in an interactive medium, you need your audience to have a cipher who can meaningfully echo the key message of the art, and when your game is about systematic political oppression, ideally, you need that boot to be on the player's neck also. There's nothing wrong with Adam Jensen in and of himself. His dialogue is reasonably well written, ably performed by Elias Toufexis, and the kind of character archetype he inhabits is perfect for a game like this. A defined backstory, but with allegiances and ideologies relaxed enough to enable player expression. In Human Revolution, Jensen made sense as a key figure in the unfurling chaos. He was the augmented foot soldier of a billionaire tech sociopath, a corporate stooge finding himself increasingly disconcerted by the conduct of both industry and government alike. Finding his feet in a new body forced upon him, Jensen was an unwilling participant in a new industrial era. He genuinely didn't ask for this. What set him apart from other orcs, however, was some unknowable genetic trait that meant the organic remains of his body didn't reject his augmentations. He didn't need a constant supply of neuropozyne, an anti-rejection drug that quickly becomes the source of political power in Mankind Divided. He wasn't held back by this huge hurdle faced by almost everyone else in his situation. In a way, Jensen has always been the epitome of privilege, even in its most primal biological form. But in the setting of human revolution, this didn't feel so pronounced. While essentially becoming a modern-day Vitruvian man, Jensen, like Johnny Gunn, was tied to an untrustworthy industrial master. Whether through contract or moral obligation, Jensen had to do David Saraf's bidding, and one of the key arcs in the game was breaking away from this master and servant relationship in the wake of Eyes Opened. In Mankind Divided, Jensen inhabits a very different kind of role. An augmented person, investigating an act of terrorism in a heavily anti-orc space. Here's an opportunity to take the show-don't-tell approach to storytelling, make traversing the world difficult, give the player a jolt of fear whenever they come face to face with the long fascist arm of the law, maybe even punish them for no reason whatsoever. Have their very presence in the world become cause for anguish, because these are the accounts being told by marginalized groups in the world, living in environments actively hostile to them. But Jensen is largely immune to all this. Despite being an orc, despite being a secret agent on foreign soil, every aspect of his life becomes one big get-out-of-jail-free card. The police don't bother you unless they catch you somewhere you shouldn't be. The tube station checkpoints are only a problem if you go through the wrong tunnel, and even then all that costs you is a few seconds for a cutscene where you flash your "excuse me, I'm very important" papers, and then you're on your merry way. Even your presence in Golem City is at your discretion. Sure, you can't hop in and out at will, but nor are you dragged there by dark circumstance like all the other residents are. Even the mechanics governing your upgrades are subject to some grand contrivance. Your new orgs are limited by processing power. To make best use of them without causing systemic problems, you need to close off other paths. It's a clever system that forces you to think carefully about what kind of playstyle you want to pursue, because you can't have it all without great personal risk. But then, towards the latter third of the game, or very early on if you know what to look for, you get this thing called a neuroplasticity calibrator, which effectively undoes this brilliant limitation. Praxis points are bountiful enough that you could easily find yourself maxed out before the game's conclusion, which defeats the point of having that limitation in the first place. It's optional, and most players won't get access to it until very late in the game, but that's not the same experience as not having it at all. It's like Elon Musk slumming it in New York in his early years when he still had access to his father's millions just a phone call away. A simulation of a thing, one with a sizable safety net, is not the same as the actual experience. Through Jensen, the player gets to override every roadblock and pushback the game has to offer. And even in the third act lockdown of Prague, a design choice I fully appreciate for attempting to effect a specific tonal shift, traversing the game world is little more than a nuisance, not the life-threatening march through the Valley of Death I suspect it was trying to be. Jensen's privilege means that he can essentially go where he pleases, do what he wants, be who he is openly, without consequence. And this is at odds with the central message of the game. The story of Adam Jensen and the story of Prague's augmented population are not one and the same. And this is a problem because it risks further exacerbating the false narrative that if you are a minority, you'll only get in trouble if you've done something wrong. Privilege is a term I feel like a lot of people struggle with. It's not necessarily about one group having a particular advantage over another, but rather not sharing a disadvantage. There are certain experiences some people simply won't have, can't have. And that can lead to a sort of partial blindness to the world around us. And this is dangerous because we still see injustices happen every day. We see racial profiling, gender inequality, a wide range of phobias, but often we can only process these things academically, through the lens of our own cultural experience. Marginalized stories get ripped from the essential humanity that fuels them, and they become clean, clinical case studies. This results in a lot of familiar statements, using the personal to argue for the general. If only they hadn't broken the law. Maybe don't dress like that if you don't want the attention. You're just looking for an excuse for your own bad behavior. The problem with writing from other perspectives is that because you can never truly know another mind, all you have to go on is what you can see and what you are told. And this is an incomplete picture of a life lived. It misses so much of what it means to be in those shoes. In this medium, in a game that puts the player this close to the action, there lies a great opportunity to show, not tell, what it means to be the one under the boot. It's not perfect. I don't believe that we'll ever really be able to emulate these kinds of experience, nor should we necessarily. But the path to success starts not with a story, but a voice. And without that voice, all you have are empty platitudes. Anyone can tell a story, but not everyone necessarily should. What I hope you take away from this is the importance of recognizing voice as a fundamental component of storytelling. That distinction matters because it's the difference between a bad allegory and a valuable history lesson. The difference between the reinforcing of common misconceptions and people actually getting a better insight into what it really means to be marginalized. These narratives are important, arguably now more than ever. But there is one question you should always ask when you begin to approach subjects like these. Is this story mine to tell? There are ways to place privilege in a marginalized setting. Games like Inkel's excellent 80 Days reveal the great branching web of cultural diversity through the eyes of a white man, but in doing so, recognize that essential barrier to understanding that comes with viewing the world through those eyes. Recognizing privilege goes a long way to repairing the dissonance that comes with trying to pair a serious discourse on prejudice in modern society with a man with exploding robot arms who can turn invisible at the press of a button. But in the case of Mankind Divided, in putting players firmly in the shoes of one of the oppressed but handing them a hall pass, the game ends up doing little more than paying lip service to what could have been its greatest strength.
I think I like EDM better!